Iowa's news now begins with a lot of breaking news on the coronavirus. President Trump suspending all travel to Europe for 30 days. The University of Iowa hospitals and clinics get ready to vaccinate more workers. This as nearly 1,000 doses arrive in Iowa City. Democrats are angry talk stalled. Speaker Pelosi says the president is putting himself ahead of the American people. The man is dead after an SUV crashes on I-380. This is a cornfield. Normally there'd be ears of corn coming up to my knees, but farmers can't plant because the ground is just too soggy. And they tell us factors like the trade war and the wet spring are putting them farther and farther behind. This may look like a barren open field, but these little blades of grass are what are known as cover crops. What they do is they take potentially harmful carbon out of the air, making the air cleaner. They take that carbon and send it right into the ground, making the soil healthier. The Democratic polls seem to shift constantly. One day Biden leads, the next day it's Warren or Buttigieg. But the big polling story in recent weeks, Bernie Sanders. He is surging in early voting states, and that is making the Democratic establishment nervous. Their job, make sure when the first astronauts set foot on the moon, we here back on Earth could hear the words and see the pictures the astronauts were sending back from another world for the very first time. It was one of the greatest achievements in human history, so they had to get this job right. Be still my beating heart, Nick, above freezing.
For more than one day,
Liquid water on the ground.
It's melting finally.
Right. Thank you, Nick, and thank you for watching Iowa's News Now. A curfew in effect tonight in the nation's capital. The National Guard and police from surrounding states now patrolling the streets. They're pushing back throngs of Trump supporters after violent protesters stormed the U.S. Capitol. And Iowa lawmakers condemning today's chaotic events. They have harsh words for some of their congressional colleagues. Who they say is to blame and why. That's coming up in our comprehensive coverage. Congress tonight in a show of resiliency, lawmakers returning to finish the job. They reconvene hours after a massive mob of Trump supporters breached the Capitol building. Here's a live look at the Capitol tonight, a disturbing day for democracy. Protesters angry about the electoral count. They all but tear apart the building this afternoon. Tonight, lawmakers are determined to complete that mostly ceremonial process. Many other Republicans who plan to object to President-elect Biden's victory are now reconsidering that stance. Iowa's News Now will bring you more details on where that process stands at this hour in just a few minutes. But first, Iowa lawmakers were caught in the middle of that chaos. Iowa's News Now reporter Shannon Mowdy speaks with a congresswoman who was on the floor when this all happened. Shannon, Marionette Miller Meeks calls the situation frightening. One of the Iowa delegation's newest members speaks out about the violence. Congresswoman Ashley Hinson. She was hurried out of the House chamber on her fourth day on the job. She hunkered down in her office with staff. They're now safe, but mayhem erupted just moments after they left the chamber. Protesters stormed the House and Senate floors. Some invaded congressional offices. Security agents tried to defend lawmakers as the mob tried to break down barricaded doors. Iowa's News Now asked Hinson, does President Trump bear any responsibility for what happened today? She says the president should avoid his most inflammatory language. Now, the violence in Washington sending shockwaves throughout the nation. Cedar Rapids is nearly 1,000 miles away from D.C., but many folks are feeling the anxiety back here in eastern Iowa. One person who lives in Cedar Rapids says it looked like a scene from a movie. Another person says the violence reminded them of what they studied in history class. New tonight, the Democrats land another major victory. Jon Ossoff now declared the winner of the other runoff race for the Senate in Georgia. Less than 1% separated him from David Perdue. Iowa's News Now reporter Scott Thuman says that dramatically changes the balance of power on Capitol Hill. Tonight, our state reaches a morbid milestone. More than 4,000 Iowans have lost their lives to the coronavirus. The state reporting more than 60 people died between 10 yesterday morning and 10 this morning. Iowa's News Now anchor Mitch Fick takes a closer look. Some good news tonight for COVID patients with mild symptoms. Mercy Medical Center in Cedar Rapids is now offering an at-home care program. Patients discharged from the ER will take home a self-monitoring kit. It includes equipment to keep track of oxygen levels, A nurse will check on the patient each day through telehealth appointments. Frontline healthcare workers are the first Americans to get the COVID vaccine, but even some of them are hesitant. Iowa's News Now reporter Liz Bonus explains why. Iowa's News Now begins with a crushing blow from President Trump to economic help millions of Americans desperately need. New tonight, President Trump halts COVID relief talks, the president tweeting he's stopping negotiations on another economic stimulus package. Here's a live look at the White House right now. The president sending out a flurry of tweets. He accuses House Speaker Nancy Pelosi of negotiating in bad faith. Congress passed the last stimulus bill back in March. The president is now promising a new one if he wins re-election. Well, Democrats are angry talks stalled. Speaker Pelosi says the president is putting himself ahead of the American people. Congresswoman Abby Finkenauer put out this statement tonight, quote, the president's decision today to walk away from negotiations on a desperately needed COVID-19 relief package callously threatened the lives and livelihoods of millions of Americans. President Trump tweeting, quote, feeling great. This as he continues treatment for COVID-19. His doctors releasing a memo. They say his vital signs are stable and they say he's reporting no symptoms. And this as the president's senior advisor, Stephen Miller, is the latest person in the White House to contract COVID-19. All this with another debate coming up. President Trump and the White House say he's looking forward to taking part in person. And today, Joe Biden says there should be no debate as long as the president tests positive for the coronavirus. Well, Iowa City has the only police review board in the entire state, but that could change soon. Iowa's News Now reporter Shannon Mounty is here to tell us Cedar Rapids takes a step closer to creating one. Tonight, they're letting the public weigh in. New details tonight on a shooting that led to a crash and left a man seriously hurt. Tonight, the shooter or shooters are still on the loose. It happened just before 8 last night close to Knoll Ridge Park near 42nd and Council Streets in northeast Cedar Rapids. Police say a vehicle pulled up behind the car the victim was in and opened fire. The car crashed. A 19-year-old man was rushed to the hospital with serious injuries. The victim was one of 5 people in the car. Police say the shooter or shooters targeted that car. We're just 2 months removed from that horrible storm that flattened Cedar Rapids. It took minutes to destroy homes and uproot trees, and it could take 25 years to rebuild and replant. Iowa's News Now reporter Dion Broxton is live in Cedar Rapids. And Dion, this sounds like a daunting job. Developing now in that never-ending fight over absentee ballots, the state Supreme Court puts a hold on a lower court's ruling to block the state from forcing county auditors to send out blank request forms for absentee ballots. Oh, the clock keeps ticking on Election Day. Lynn County Auditor Joel Miller wants the High Court to act quickly. And Mars ain't no place to raise a kid.
Yeah, I can imagine that'd be a bit of a difficulty for them. Yeah. Not a lot of facilities there.
Rocket Man.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Wake up with Iowa's News Now this morning starting at 5 a.m. Have a good night. Iowa's News Now begins with a lot of breaking news on the coronavirus. President Trump suspending all travel to Europe for 30 days. The president making the announcement a short time ago in his address to the nation. It's an unprecedented move to try to curb the spread of the virus. The ban will begin on Friday at midnight. It will not apply to the United Kingdom. Now, all this after the World Health Organization officially declares the outbreak a pandemic. President Trump laying out the nation's path to fight the crisis. And there's even more news breaking tonight on the coronavirus. Let's start in the world of pro sports. Iowa's News Now learning the NBA is suspending their season. This after Utah Jazz player Rudy Gobert tests positive for the virus. The Jazz abruptly canceled their game tonight against the Oklahoma City Thunder. And in college basketball, both the men's and women's NCAA tournaments will go on, but they'll play without fans. The NCAA issuing a statement saying the game should be restricted to only essential staff and family members of the players. And Tom Hanks and his wife Rita test positive for the coronavirus. The actor tweeting out the announcement just a short time ago. He says, quote, "We felt a bit tired, like we had colds and some body aches. Rita had some chills and that came and went. Slight fevers, too. The couple is in Australia right now. He says they'll be tested and observed and isolated for as long as public health and safety requires. The sentencing date is now set for a convicted killer. A jury last month found Jerry Burns guilty of stabbing Michelle Martinko back in 1979. Burns will be formally charged on April 17th. He faces a mandatory sentence of life in prison without the chance of parole. The Iowa Flood Center is gearing up for possible spring flooding, and they're giving us a progress report. Iowa's News Now reporter Lucas Vaz talks with researchers about what they're doing to make sure every Iowan is safe. An eastern Iowa man inspires a new state law. It lets him live out his dream of cutting hair on wheels. Iowa's News Now State House reporter Caroline Cummings has the story from the Capitol. Iowa's News Now is back from a very hectic night with a weather forecast from our Weather First meteorologist, Brandon Marshall. Please give us some good news. Brandon, thank you, and thank you for watching Iowa's News Now. Wake up with Iowa's News Now this morning starting at 5 a.m. Connect with Iowa's News Now on all your screens. Have a good night. Massive wildfires scorched the West Coast, turning skies into scenes from alien worlds. Punishing hurricanes pound the Atlantic and Gulf coasts, flattening cities and towns with powerful winds, inundating them with floods. And a catastrophic derecho here in the Midwest leveled parts of eastern Iowa, shearing off roofs, toppling trees, tearing down power lines, leaving much of Linn County in the dark for days.
The field on the other side of the farmstead here was completely wiped out.
The brutal August storm hammered Wade Dooley.
That's a lot of money that just went away.
Dooley says he's seen extreme weather intensify at his farm here in eastern Iowa.
It has flooded so many times, I can't remember the years that it didn't flood.
The vast majority of climate scientists agree global warming is real, and we humans are causing it.
Climate change is affecting my day-to-day activities and my year-to-year planning. So I work out in the weather every day. And the crazier the weather is, the harder it is to get work done, the harder it is to make money, the harder it is to keep farming.
Volatile shifts in day-to-day weather and overall climate are hitting Dooley's bottom line.
20% of my income just went away. That hurts.
Our yields are probably 25% lower than what we would like them to be.
Mitchell Hora is a farmer in Ainsworth. He sees the shifts in climate patterns as well.
We're seeing a lot more variability because of that. We were super cold. Now we were super dry. It was really warm.
The National Climate Assessment says global warming by 2050 threatens to wipe out all the gains agriculture made in productivity since the 1980s.
We need to ensure that the farm is going to be able to be resilient no matter what.
Farmers for decades viewed climate science with skepticism.
They didn't want to believe in it because they always felt like they were being attacked. That the urban society was blaming all of us out here for destroying the planet.
The Environmental Protection Agency estimates agriculture generates about a quarter of greenhouse gas emissions each year.
Farmers are realizing that we have contributed to the problem, but it's the market that's driven us this way. We didn't consciously do these things, but now we're ready to consciously be part of the solution.
Growers like Hora and Dooley believe farmers are uniquely suited to lead the way in the fight to reverse global warming.
We can not only reduce our carbon footprint directly, but we can become net positive in that sequestration.
We can do the most good with the least amount of effort compared to everybody else. We actually can have a greater impact because we have the landscape.
One answer, diversification.
We're really focused on planting cover crops.
That's buckwheat.
They're crops farmers plant between the periods they grow their main cash crops.
That's a way to capture carbon.
This may look like a barren open field, but these little blades of grass are what are known as cover crops. What they do is they take potentially harmful carbon out of the air, making the air cleaner. They take that carbon and send it right into the ground, making the soil healthier.
What farmers can do is put cover crops on every acre. If we turned our countryside green in the fall, we would change how the weather patterns operate through this state.
I have crop growing all year around that is pumping carbon into my soil, that's feeding my microbes, it's protecting my soil against erosion, it's pulling carbon out of the air all the time.
Dooley says farmers can't do it alone.
We can do a lot, but we've got to have the politicians on board, and they've got to stop treating this as something that is a liberal or a conservative idea. If the government would put an awful lot of effort to incentivizing the planting of trees, we could completely revolutionize all of Iowa's agriculture and the nation's agriculture if we went towards a more perennial model.